just a positive.
Okay.
All right. Okay, today, each week, the video goes over that week's module. And so for people that are working ahead, that could be a confirmation of what they've done or redirection. But there were a few points I wanted to talk about today. And since you're the only one here, I am hoping that if I ask for questions, if you don't have any questions yourself, if you can't, wouldn't mind just imagining what other people might have, what questions other people might have in the class. And I know you're recovering, but do you feel do you feel together enough that you can follow along and maybe even ask questions like that?
Yes, I do. I will try my best.
Okay, good. One thing, this last assignment, I don't know if you did you watch the video or were you here last week?
I watched the video and I was here last week.
Okay, good. One of the things I said a couple times is that my system does not recognize HEIC files, and a lot of phones, when you just take a photo and then try to upload it to Canvas directly from your phone like that, it's an HEIC file, especially if you have Google Photos. And so the couple people that turned that in with just the HEIC files, I put a 0 on there and asked them to go ahead and resubmit with JPEG, PDF, or Word doc. It seems like Google Docs doesn't seem to connect as well either. So those are the three files we really need: JPEG, PDF, or Word doc. And if anybody sees a 0 for an assignment, what that means is primarily it's a reminder to do the thing, or just look at the comment. And if it's a file that I can't read or you didn't submit the right item, then just follow the directions and resubmit. Not a big deal. What I will also do is about a week after things are due, I will put a 0 in there so everything is graded. And again, Addison, what does a 0 mean?
That we didn't just get a grade on it and that we can turn it in still,
Right.
right?
It's just basically a reminder to do it. Yeah, basically. But it also helps you to see what your grade is. And like if you're not very happy with the percentage that you're getting, then you can look at what's on Canvas. You'll see the zeros, and it will remind you hopefully to turn in those assignments. And as you turn them in, as I grade them, then your grade will go up. So I don't want anybody to panic, but that is a really big thing I needed to mention. No HEIC files and uh, links to Google Docs really does not work on my system. It just so do you remember what the three files are? File types that we need?
Oh gosh, no.
Okay, it's JPEG, PDF, and Word doc. So those are the three files.
Okay.
Now this week's module is, well, last week's was we were talking a little bit about the two hemispheres of the brain, how they fit together, and everything like that. This week we're going to talk a little bit about why is art important, and I'm going to clarify a little bit about the tools of artistic critique. And if you go through have you had a chance to skim the module at all and look at it?
I have looked through it.
Okay, good, good, good. I'm just going to go over the main points, and we'll try to do this. I would like to do this in about 30 minutes to 45 minutes if we possibly can. All right. I'm an artist, and so I believe I am biased. I do believe that art is important. I think that when we look at manufactured societies where um, usually some sort of tyranny has imposed a version of the society that they want on people rather than people organically developing a society. When we see those kinds of imposed societies, art, we can see what the quote unquote frivolous things, what it looks like when the frivolous things are removed, like when the art is removed. Mao Zedong, when he developed essentially communist China, he decided that art was intended specifically and only for the development of propaganda. Now, propaganda is a subset of art, and I think it's a legitimate field to study. But oh, hey, Reed. But if art is only going to be used to support the leadership of a country or the government of a country, um, that really takes away an awful lot of what art means, the value of art, I think. And there's a number of reasons why art is important. And we're not talking just about painting. I know a lot of people will think painting and drawing, but do you remember what we talked about last week? What is art? It's any activity where you do what?
Probably create something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that could be anything from teaching preschoolers to making rope. It does not matter. When you are creating something that did not exist before in quite the way that you're doing it, and you couple that process with something outside of your regular, normal, everyday self, and that could be your higher self, that could be uh, intentful cognitive thinking, it could be um, inspiration, even. When you do that, you are creating art. It's not just making something to make something. And I think most of us have somebody in our life that we can look at whose cooking is spectacular. And we can see that they may do the exact same thing as anybody else, but for one reason or another, their salad or their sandwich tastes better. We all have a favorite teacher that we grew up with. There is, in most of our lives, there's somebody who was like a farmer or a mechanic, or even in my elementary school, there was a janitor. And, these are people where you don't normally think of them as artists, but by the way that they lived their life and did what they did, they created something that didn't exist before. And so that's the kind of open realm that we're talking about when we discuss art. In the under the module why is art or under the section why is art important, there's 6 primary topics, and I wanted to address each of them pretty quickly, but I would like you guys, if you wouldn't mind, alternate. If one of you or the other would like to say something about it, if you can think of something to say about it, that'd be great. First one is art preserves culture. How does art preserve culture?
Well, if something gets written down or transcribed onto something, it's there for a lot longer than the person might be. So it would save what the context would be about.
Yeah, excellent. That's a very good example. Uh, a lot of the movies that were called sword and sandal epics in the 50s and 60s that dealt with like Rome and Greece had a very odd view of that kind of realm. And the reason why I'm saying this is very specific. We now know that gladiators were revered like sports heroes are today. And uh, we know that because essentially little kids would scribble little drawings of their favorite gladiator on stadia walls and write their names underneath. And archaeologists have found what essentially are action figures of some of the more popular gladiators, just in the detritus of these 2,000-year-old homes, and that preserves an element of Roman culture that most of us don't even consider. Isn't that interesting? Did you know that kids in Roman times had favorite gladiators that they would make action figures for?
No, but it sounds pretty practical considering that, I mean, a lot of people would probably show up to those, so it'd be a big prominent point in their life.
Yeah, I think exactly. And there's a lot of other examples of art. Sometimes some of the cultures that we uh, know about, we only know through literature and the visual art that they've left. Another aspect is that art documents history. I think this is particularly true when we see art that has one to one correspondence with events. An example of this, believe it or not, is indigenous people of the continent of Australia have a verbal history that records astronomical events that happened over 50,000 years ago. So, in their verbal history, their verbal art, their storytelling art, they have recorded historical events that are millennia old. And I think that's about 12 or 15 times older than we believe that civilization started. 50,000 years ago, they have this in their verbal traditions, which are essentially their uh, literary arts. Now, can either of you, can Addison, can you think of another example of where art may document history?
When it shows how places used to look, possibly.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful example. I want to say Maryland. There's a lighthouse that nobody knows who made. It's much older than the colonization of North America by Europeans, and it just started showing up on maps as soon as people started uh, coming into the area, and they just called it a lighthouse. But yeah, maps are a good example. Drawings of buildings are a good example. Like some of these tapestries you see from medieval Europe have like are almost windows into time periods like that, or Dutch paintings of just scenes around the farm. Really gives you a very clear picture of what life might have looked like centuries ago. Yeah, that's an excellent example. Another point is that art speaks to complex ideas. Um, why do you think that art might speak to complex ideas? How would that fit? I think that one way is we. Oh yeah, Reed, go ahead.
Well, you said how art speaks about complex ideas, right?
Right.
Well, I think it would be along the same line as even though most art can be made 2D or 3D, they can still have elements that are more emotional, or it's not even a visually displayed item, it's what went into it.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And there are some aspects of that where, for example, looking at art from different time periods when it's the same scene from the Bible, for example, we can see a little bit of a reflection of the politics of the era of the artist who's making it, just because of the assumptions that they make about the visual environment that they're painting. Like there are periods in medieval biblical painting where they try to make it, it looks like there's an attempt made to make it historical, and there's many examples where it's not. And the difference is, and sometimes when they're painting something that everybody knew was 1500 years before, but they're painting it in a contemporary setting, uh, a lot of art historians have discovered that that means the people, the artist, is trying to help the person looking at the painting to put themselves in the story. Like, for example, say if it's a parable in the New Testament and painting it with architecture that you can see out your own window any day, then it really drives it home as a more personal kind of story. So yeah, I think, and that's a very complex idea uh, that is just illustrated in as almost a byproduct of what the artist is thinking when they're painting. So yeah, excellent. Um, Addison, how do you feel art may build wonder or develop wonder?
It can make people just think about like just different things, make them wonder what's going on in the painting.
Yeah, and it develops almost like a cognitive communication between the artist and the person viewing. So yeah, very good, excellent. Now, how is art important to any field? It doesn't matter what the field is. Is art important to any field?
I'd say greatly. I mean, I'm in mechanical engineering and I'm taking a class called 1150. And my assignment yesterday, I had to draw out prototypes of my design and certain views of it. And I had to all write that all down and draw it all so I could submit it to the teacher.
That is not something that you can do easily without the skills of art, is it? Yeah, I think that's an excellent example. Now, Addison, how a lot of the times the world that an artist creates is fictional. How can fiction inform reality? And I'll give you a big hint for one of the big ones in the module, Star Trek.
I honestly have no clue.
Oh, okay. Um, the developer of the flip phone worked at Bell Labs. When he was a younger person, he loved watching the Star Trek shows. What does Captain Kirk have in those Star Trek, the original series? Have any of you guys seen old clips like that?
No.
Okay, well,
Doesn't he have
Captain, what's that,
doesn't he
Reed?
have like a little, it's kind of like those pocket mirrors, but it's like two circles and it flips open.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The creator of the cell phone in Bell Labs said that he was inspired by Captain Kirk's communicator that flipped open like that. And then, of course, 10 years ago, everybody had these flip phones that were exactly like the Star Trek communicators. And people in my family, of course, had them so that when you opened them, they would have the little chirping that Captain Kirk's communicator, uh, the noise that Captain Kirk's communicator made when it flipped open. But the cell phone that we have today is a direct result of somebody wanting to manufacture a reality that looked like that original art. Isn't that interesting? There's something that I want to briefly talk about that kind of segues from this into the next part that I wanted to talk about, which is the tools of artistic critique. Have either of you heard of Albrecht Duhrer? I mentioned him last week. He was a German dry point etcher who did a lot of very symbolist illustrations. Do you remember what the symbolists are? Artists that use symbols to communicate more than just what's on the visual frame of reference. But Albrecht Dürer talks about pillars of art that I think doesn't just apply to 2D or 3D art, but applies to every creative endeavor. One is, he said, one of those pillars is proportion, proportion that is proper to the subject or the effort being made. Now, this may mean the physical proportions, the visual proportions of a work of 2D art. You've heard of rule of thirds and orthogons and things like that. But it can also be reflective in movie making or documentary making, where if the proportions of different segments of the story and the representation in the movie, if they're off, you can really feel it. And there needs to be an amount of action. There needs to be a proportionate amount of emotion and drama and visual spectacle to make these movies feel like what they are. That's also true of class time. If you are, for example, a preschool teacher, I'm gonna come back to that a little bit, often and on throughout the semester. But there are proportions for active teaching time, active listening, and nap time. We all remember nap time or snack time, but those elements of proportion are vital to the creation of art. Another pillar is he talks about materials. What are the proper materials? If, for example, you are dealing with a preschool class, you are going to be working with things like safety scissors. You're going to have a lot of band-aids. You're going to have plastic cups. You're not going to be working with uh, chainsaws and power tools. The materials need to be appropriate to the setting or the subject matter of the art. Like Reed, when you're working on your mechanical engineering drawings, it's going to be very difficult to do your drawings and get credit for them if you don't use the materials that the teacher specifies. And in that case, the proper materials are outlined and specified by the instructor. A third pillar is honesty or craftsmanship. Now, everything that we do should be done with the best craftsmanship we can muster, but that does not mean we reach beyond our capabilities or get frustrated when we can't do a master's work the first time we touch a medium. So, for example, uh, somebody who's an academic who has decades of experience behind them is going to speak and write very different than somebody who is trying to submit their first paper for publication. And that is also true of uh, dance or singing or any of those kinds of things. It's very rare that somebody who just begins singing will begin with the Night Queen's aria from the Magic Flute. I mean, you start where you're most honestly at. You also want to stretch yourself, but throughout all of that, your craft is highly dependent on being honest. And sometimes one of the things that frustrates me with some art students is that they get really angry with themselves for not being able to do a quote unquote perfect job right out of the gate when we look at this mastery of material that some people have that they only develop after screwing up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So being honest, I think, and having good craftsmanship depends. A big part of that is not being frustrated with yourself. And the fourth one is inspiration. And this is creating something where you are either drawing from a deeper part of yourself, your higher self, the universe around you, trying to open yourself up for outside ideas. And by outside, I mean things separate from your immediate perception. And I think everybody who tries this has that experience at some point. And it may or may not be in what we like to easily label art. It could be in music, it could be in engineering. My oldest brother found inspiration a lot when he was doing math. And now he's a biostatistician, which sounds completely awful to me, but it makes him happy. So those are the four pillars that Albrecht Duhrer talks about: proportion, materials, craft or honesty, and inspiration. But I think that there's a fifth pillar too that is vital to allowing art to be complete, and that is completing a circuit, creating something that communicates with someone. And it could be creating something that communicates with yourself, but a lot of the times it could be creating something that just completes a circuit with a viewer or somebody else. I don't think it really matters which that is, but one of the saddest things I've heard about is there's a vault of one of the largest collections of original Picasso art that is in Salt Lake City somewhere. And I don't know where it is, but I learned about this from a friend of mine who went to see it. And he said it's amazing what is in this collection, but the owner has kept it in this vault because he doesn't want anybody to see it. He doesn't want it to get dirty or go nasty or whatever. And I think that that's really sad because one of the reasons visual art is created is so that people can there is a circuit completed between the artist and the viewer. And if the art is sitting in a vault moldering away, the art it doesn't really isn't really allowed to be itself anymore. Do you guys see that at all?
I mean, I'd say there's two ways to it because it really depends. If the artist is using his emotions and feeling and writing about his art, it's kind of like a semblance of what he feels, and he puts that in there, and that could go two ways. If he wants his feelings to be shown and put out there, there could also be the way that if he just creates an art piece and it's just close to him and he just wants it to kind of, he created it just for emotionally kind of releasing some hatred he has to just put on a wall, and he doesn't really want that to be put everywhere.
I think that's really valid, and I think that's important too. The art is still complete because that person has somehow completed the circuit. You know, maybe they are just working something out, and it's only for their own eyes, and that is still completely valid. I think you're absolutely right. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the tools of artistic critique, and here there's four of them. And as you go through, I want you to look at each of those and think about them. The first is describe. And I'm just going to touch on these really briefly because you're going to be visiting this again in the module. When you describe, you are talking about the art piece or the situation, specifically how it impacts the perceptible environment. How big is it? What color is it? What's the material made out of? What are the materials being used? Does it look like it's going to fall apart? Does it look sturdy? Uh, um, those kinds of things. Does it look heavy? Does it look light? Uh, very specific observations to the actual physical presence of the art piece itself. And then the next is analyze, where we start thinking about how how did the person make it? How uh, how did they use the different materials that they used? Does it look like they did it quickly? Does it look like they took a lot of time? Does it look like they took a lot of care? Does it look like they closed their eyes, turned around, and threw it over their shoulder? Um, is there evidence that they have a lot of experience with the different techniques being used? I think that's important. So we start to inject a little bit of ourselves into the artwork as we try to guess what the artist was thinking, and then, or what the artist was doing. Then the third one is interpret. And this is where we start guessing what the artist is thinking. Unless we talk to the artist directly, it's very difficult. And even sometimes then it doesn't help too much. But unless we're able to communicate with the artist's brain directly, it's very difficult to know the ins and outs and depths of what the artist was truly thinking when they created that. And that's, I think, not all that important. The most important part about analyzing is imagining yourself in a conversation with whoever made that thing. What do you think their worldview is? How do you think they would respond to your questions about what they were thinking? Is it obvious that they had any emotion? Which emotions they had when they were making the thing? Does it look like the artist is just communicating this is an assignment and I'm bored out of my skull, or is the artist trying to communicate something else? And then the fourth one is, this is where we inject most of ourselves in it, I think, where we decide, where we evaluate the artwork and decide, is it successful? Does it have value? What is it worth? Uh, a lot of the times, worth is very reflective, very distinctive to the value set of the observer. For example, um, you and I are very aware of the value of a nice gold coin, but you put that in the hamster cage, and the hamster's not going to care at all. There's stories in Voltaire's Candide. Uh, the the heroes of the story, the protagonists, find El Dorado, the Golden City, and in this Golden City, they're just amazed at how people are walking and peeing on gold walls and streets, and the children are playing with beautiful gemstones, just like they're jacks or dice, and they're completely befuddled by how little the people that live in the Golden City uh, value what they live with. But that's that's something to think about. What is the value? Is the artwork successful in our eyes? Do we think that the artist believed that they were successful when they made it? Um, and what is it worth? It's worth. So those are four things that I went over rather quickly. We'll talk about them more, but think about that as you go through that module. And then I also talk a little bit about um, Saint Francis and uh, Al Malik, Sultan Al Malik, who was the essentially the ruler of Egypt when the Fifth Crusade uh, started, and the conversation that they had that basically ended a world war. And the reason why that's important is that as you think about things, I want you to be very cognizant of your vocabulary and use your words precisely. When you're describing something, yay big or so big is not quite as effective as it looks like it's about 8 inches long. And can you feel that difference too, just in the use of words?
Yes.
Yeah. When we're precise, um, not only I think do we think better, but we're able to communicate better. And most important for a college class, all our family is going to be saying, wow, the money we spent on their going to college really paid off because they are using the big words. And that's probably the most important thing. And next in the module, we talk a little bit about flow state. Do either of you know or can either of you articulate what flow state is? Have you ever done something where you look up and you realize that a couple hours have passed and your legs have fallen asleep or your arms are sore and you didn't even realize that that much time has passed?
Yeah.
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah, this is a really strong indicator of flow state, where we are so involved in something, we almost become one with whatever the activity is, whatever we're doing. Almost become one with whatever we're doing, and we seem to lose all sense of time. And a lot of the times, if we have roommates or family members, they'll tell us later, "I was talking to you for 20 minutes and you never even looked up," and it's because we don't hear them. And it just depends on what activities, and for each person it's a different set of activities, but all of us have achieved that in did different things that we do. And a lot of the times we achieve that flow state when we become involved with something we really associate with, or something that we really enjoy, like a hobby or an activity that we just really like to do. And so that's something that we to be mindful of when you get to that portion of the module. Just look at flow state. There is a specific link between flow state and a sense of satisfaction, and to some extent a sense of happiness. So it's important to be mindful of that. But for the last 10 minutes of our time together, I wanted to talk about one of the assignment, a big part of the assignments for this week, which is measure and alignment. When Egyptian tomb painters would make their paintings, a lot of the times they would draw them on papyrus that was not an awful lot bigger than your computer screen. And what they would do is draw shapes that were to scale, uh, or scaled down versions of the areas that they had to draw on. And they would make their drawings in that area so that the shape was right. Then they would draw a grid over that, draw a grid over the tomb wall, and each grid square they would replicate in a larger scale onto the grid wall. And so it's basically a way of Xeroxing something bigger, but using no technology at all other than pencil and the wits of the artist. The reason why this is important is uh, the the assignments deal with replicating designs. And I think this can be a challenge for a lot of us. Um, and there's a couple easy ways to deal with this. And the assignment talks a little bit about it, but not very much. One is if you sketch out a rough rectangle or block for the area that you're replicating, and then divide that up into the major segments that you see. Like for example, in the module, one looks like almost an EKG graph where you have little spikes along a line. So in order to replicate that, you would draw a line, then you divide it into the spaces in between the spikes, and draw another line for the height of the spikes that's parallel to the first line. So, and then after doing that, you look at it and kind of start sketching in the shapes. When you draw a rectangle around the space or draw a shape around the area that you want to replicate the drawing in, it gives you a frame of reference, and it makes it an awful lot easier to copy an image. And for example, I'm just going to draw just a really quick little example here. Okay, let's see. Can you guys see that?
No.
Oh, no, not even close. That is horrible. Okay. Let's see if I can get a better pen. Is that any better?
It's blurring it out, but I was blurring
The
everything out.
background effect
Oh,
is
now
taking
it's all
over.
gone.
Yeah,
Oh, that's okay. How's that?
that's we could see it.
Okay. All right. So what I've done is drawn a rectangle with a little circle at the bottom. If I use the idea of the Egyptian tomb painters, so I want to replicate this design into a bigger rectangle, what I'm going to do is draw another rectangle that is roughly the same proportions. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to draw, and then what I want to do is do some basically hanging lines to divide this up so I have a frame of reference that I can use to replicate that circle. What I'm first going to do on the small one is draw a vertical line to split it in half and a horizontal line to split it in half. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to do the same thing in that bigger rectangle. A vertical line to split it in half and a horizontal line to split it in half. This gives me a frame of reference on which I can hang the rest of the image. And you can make as many dividing lines as you want. When I do stained glass windows, I will usually use 7 vertical lines and 7 horizontal lines. So I've divided the whole thing into 8s, and that really helps me to do that. But now, with that horizontal and vertical line splitting in half, I can see how that circle fits in. Where does the top part of the circle come?
Right below the cross in the middle.
Yeah. And where does the bottom go of the circle go?
Almost touching the bottom.
All right. And then how about the two sides? They're almost halfway in between that center line and the outside line. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
About.
close. Yeah, about. So I've gotten 4 points of reference for that bottom circle, and then I can just draw it in And I've done a pretty close approximation of copying that image. Oh, let's see. There we go. See that? Now, if I was doing this for the assignment, what I would do is that vertical and horizontal line, I would draw with light pencil, and just using it as a reference point, and then erase it when I'm done. So as you look at the assignment, there's 3 different images to replicate. Just think about different ways of lining it up, dividing the space, and using reference points that you draw and then you're going to erase later to replicate the design. And they're very simple designs. Not the big one is just a little bit more complicated than what we just did. And if you have any questions about that, then we'll talk about it next week as well after everybody's given it a shot, and see what other kind of ideas we can come up with to make it easier. I think one of the big reasons for why we want to do this is when you start copying images or replicating designs, if you work without a frame of reference, and if you just start in a portion of the drawing and then don't have any anchor points to measure against, your drawing is going to look about as good as those blind contour drawings that everybody did. And those look really weird, which they're supposed to, that's just the way it is. But if we can draw a rectangle and then vertical and horizontal lines to kind of measure against as we are replicating an image, it makes it an awful lot easier to replicate that image with a certain degree of accuracy, and we can recognize it. And this is just an initial introduction to the idea of proportion and taking measurements as you're working on something. Now, of course, we're not using a ruler or anything like that. We're just kind of guessing, and that is perfectly fine. But it's so much easier to copy an image or replicate something when you do to create first that physical and stable points of relation to measure everything against. It's like Reed, when you're sometimes when you do your drawings, if you have graph paper that you're working with, it's the same kind of thing. Or Addison, what field is what do you study?
Exercise science.
Exercise science. When you are teaching somebody, for example, proper movement, you have different reference points on the body. For example, if you're doing a stretch with the upper spine, then you'll have the person, for example, maybe grab the opposite shoulders, but you're using fixed points of reference so that they know how to replicate the movement that you're showing them. So, and either of these things kind of apply to this, where we're developing some sort of a frame of reference so that we can use that to measure against when we replicate a design. And whether or not that makes any sense right now, when you look at the module, I think it'll make a lot more sense. Right. Well, I've covered about everything that I need to. Do you guys have some questions, or that I wanted to? Do you guys have any questions about the stuff that we talked about? And if you guys don't, because I'm amazingly astute at communicating, can you think of a question one of your classmates might have?
No, I think you explained everything quite well in the module.
Okay. How about you, Reed? Any questions?
I can't think of any.
When I was doing my mechanical drawing, the first 2 lines that I would draw anytime I drafted out a shape was a horizontal line, and then I would split that with a vertical line, and that would become my point of reference. I'm sorry that I did not use graph paper very often, and I don't know what you guys use today and in the modern era after the Earth's crust has cooled, as you do your designs. But I'm pretty sure that there's that same kind of idea of a fixed point of reference to measure against. Is that true?
Yeah, when making our prototype designs, we usually do use, or we're really encouraged to use graph paper. I don't know how often it gets used. I personally didn't
Oh,
have any
okay.
on me, so I didn't use it.
But there's still some sort of a reference point to work against. So I think that that's really important. If you guys do have questions about this assignment, remember, if you're not happy with the grade that you get, you can always turn it in. You can also do research on YouTube. But I would appreciate whatever you guys find out and discover, if you could mention it next week when we get together, and let me know how you resolved the assignment, if you don't mind. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any more questions, I hope you guys have an absolutely astounding week, and nobody has any surgeries, nobody gets sick, nobody gets in any accidents, and everybody has an absolutely beautiful and wonderful time at school and being responsible young adults.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Why,
Thanks for
thank
coming,
you.
guys. Thank you very much.